We're going to start with David Prendergast, who we've been working with closely as part of the aforementioned Horizon 2020 project Shapes, but I'll let David talk about that. David and I first engaged when we were doing the initial research for the first edition of Neighbourhoods of the Future in 2016. And at that point in time, he was working for Intel. And then coincidentally, we engaged through this project as well. And now he is an academic. But I will not talk about that, as I promised I wouldn't. So here we go. Over to you, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Ian, for the invitation to talk for 10 minutes today. I appreciate it. So just to introduce myself, I'll see, hopefully these slides will work. There we go, Grant. Over the last 22 years, my research has focused on aging in the life course, connected environments, and the urban Internet of Things. I've had the opportunity, the fortune to work as an anthropologist in both academia and industry. I worked at Intel for 12 years, directing user experience and design research teams in the area of digital health and sustainable cities. And then in 2018, as you mentioned, I joined Maynooth University in Ireland as Professor of Science, Technology and Society. Much of my career has focused on driving transdisciplinary research projects, exploring real-world wicked problems in academic industrial collaborations. Whenever possible, I believe that impact should be measured using the triple bottom line, that we consider social environmental value as well as the economic outcomes of research. And I think I was hearing John Godfrey arguing today, and I kind of very much would agree we should in many cases add health and well-being value to that. In recent years, it's much more common to hear project proposals include concepts such as stakeholder engagement, service design and participatory design, co-creation and co-production. Whenever possible, I like to carry out ethnographic research at the start of a project in order to learn about the lives, the skills, practices, work patterns, needs and challenges of the people the team will be designing with and for. This helps reflect about our assumptions, whilst also developing sensitivity to cultural nuance and individual context. And I think this is particularly relevant when developing standards, not least around complex communities such as multi-generational neighbourhoods. As others have noted today, it's essential to involve stakeholders throughout the process and beyond, from problem definition and exploration to prototype development, early stage testing and iteration, longitudinal evaluation, as well as publishing results and developing policies or guidelines. When I first joined Intel in 2006, I was attracted by the opportunity to use my qualitative research skills to build products and services that would help improve lived experiences within the later life course. We set up the Technology Research for Independent Living Centre, and in this we built multidisciplinary teams focused on areas such as social connection, falls prevention and cognitive function. These were supported by a testbed of 650 households across Ireland. As the labs and the clinical assessments got underway, we carried out an ethnographic research project called the Global Aging Experience. And today I'd like to briefly share some of these stories with you and reflect on how these affected our thinking around technology design for aging in place. So Giuseppe is a 77-year-old man who lives in a small town in Tuscany. He lives with his sister in his own home, which faces a village square. In the back, it opens onto a beautiful garden. He's had 2 hip replacements. Despite serious difficulties, including the need to use walking sticks, Giuseppe makes a daily tour of the village square, often multiple times, as a form of physical and mental practice. To keep going is the important thing, he tells us. When the weather is so bad that venturing outdoors is impossible, Giuseppe walks laps around his dining room. At night, lying in bed, he dreams of a time when he'll be able to make it down his back steps to the garden, which he hasn't seen in 2 years. He imagines every step, every place he would grab the handrail as he plots his route. Giuseppe quickly became a source of inspiration for us in several ways. First, he reminded us to think in terms of aspirations and not limitations. Despite his challenges, he still looks forward to being able to use his back stairs again. It is the daily struggle to overcome his painful condition that gives him purpose. If technology is truly going to serve people, it has to reach beyond the simply physical or even cognitive needs that may be associated with aging and address the human desire for fulfillment and meaning. Whether this is found through looking after grandchildren, chatting in the village square, travel, volunteering, or simply Giuseppe's back stairs, this sense of purpose is incredibly important. Mary, aged 92, lives in County Cork in the south of Ireland. She has a television upstairs in her house, which is not plugged in. That is for when I get old, she tells us, when I have to spend more time in bed. Beyond planning for the future, Mary was interested in another way. She represents one of the many people who move away from their homes and communities to live with their children, often in distant towns or cities. This worked out well for Mary, but many others experience loneliness and difficulties integrating into their new neighbourhoods. Trini lives in the south of Spain, not far from the city of Seville. Her home is a second-storey apartment in the village where she spent her entire life. Because there is no elevator in her building, she doesn't come down to the street as often as she used to. Although she has no immediate family, she still has a network of people who care about her. She lives in a warm and beautiful part of the world. Her windows are nearly always open. Trini, her niece, calls up to her every day. "Can I bring you anything?" "Good morning, Trini," the local produce vendor calls up to her. "How are you today?" "I don't just listen to her words," the man tells us later. "I listen to how her voice sounds. If she's not well, I can tell by the sound of her voice." This simple little wellness checking routine is enacted millions of times a day in villages and neighbourhoods throughout the world, and it's packed with insights about the values we need to build into our technologies. We need to think about technologies that support this community-based approach to health. The open window is a wonderful metaphor for thinking about how we might imagine technologies that are similarly embedded in the simplicity of daily life and meaningful both to older adults and those who care about them. So the final vignette I want to explore today is a retired farmer in Sweden we shall call Eric. He always stands out in my mind as a forcible reminder that even well-funded instrumental home care is not always sufficient. Eric underwent the gradual retirement of many farmers. After several nasty falls, however, by the time I met him, his life had withdrawn to his kitchen, bedroom and bathroom. Uneven balance and deteriorating eyesight were the two key tipping points for Eric. His mind was still bright and agile, but losing his driver's license and lack of accessible public transport deprived him of his independence, along with the activities such as singing in a choir that had kept him active and feeling useful. Most of all, he misses being able to work. During the second day of my visit, Eric began sobbing and showed me a recent letter rejecting his application to a care home. His loneliness and despair spoke to the consequences if we don't get companionship care right. So as we consider technologies and neighbourhoods that enable independent living, a well-designed ISO framework could help ensure that we plan for the full biopsychosocial context. Technology can help in so many ways. Indeed, it is starting to fulfill some of its promises, but we still have a long way to go in this journey. Individual case studies like the four I've provided are full of insights about the later life course that an ISO collaborative process can use. Drawing from a qualitative database of 100 such ethnographic encounters, we identified a number of key themes that older adults in our study commonly discussed. These included things such as finding ways to move health provision away from hospitals and into the home and community, supporting cognition and physical activities, help navigating the complex assemblages and pathways of often disjointed care systems, maintaining and building social connections versus dangers of social and emotional loneliness, feeling safe at home and in the community, a desire for living environments that enable flexibility of choice despite functional disadvantage, and the ability to continue leading a meaningful and productive life. So the work I've discussed today resulted in traditional impacts such as the creation of articles, patents, products and 2 successful companies. We're also reminded the difficulties involved in the cadences of technology giants and National Health Service procurement. Corporate endurance is often challenged in what is sometimes perceived to be a market of pilots. With this in mind, I'm delighted to be involved, along with colleagues such as Ian Sparrow, in a New Horizon 2020 project called Shapes that's focused on building an open ecosystem supporting large-scale deployments of integrated digital health solutions. And I'm leading a small team that's exploring the life worlds of older people from 90 households across Europe. That's looking at a whole range of themes, many of which we've looked at today. What I like about the Shapes project is that it recognises that a technology platform for smart and healthy ageing has to work in different ways for different people. As we build ISO frameworks for the multi-generational neighbourhoods of the future, we should consider that ageing in place means far more than continuing to live amongst the comforts and memories of home. For many older adults, it is environments. Okay, I'll just finish. I just on my last little bit here. I want to tell you. I think it's important that we think about environments where people are safe, where they have a sense of belonging and purpose, where they're known in their communities. There's also the opportunity to make decisions about their care, to keep active and busy, to laugh with friends, and to be able to navigate hurdles such as visiting the shops. It's the trust that they and their caregivers will be heard when reaching out for support during the trials and tribulations of the later life course. And I think a well-designed ISO framework will consolidate research insights and coordinate design practices around critical themes such as these. Thank you.
God, you rushed that last bit. I tell you what, I've been privileged to be developing this particular program, but I would also like to just point out that along the way I have the opportunity to work with some extraordinary minds, and David is one of those, because what he rushed through there is so insightful, it's so rich, it so changes your thinking in terms of how you go about thinking about older adults, and it's not putting them in fat suits, I can assure you. It is this kind of real detailed, granular approach to research looking at it from a consumer-centric perspective, because at the end of the day, as he said, David was involved in selling product or helping Intel to sell product. So now coming full circle and being in a situation where he's looking to inform environments of the future, absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much for that, David. We now move on to Judith Phillips. Now, she wears two hats. She is a pioneer in multi-generational housing. We first met a couple of years ago when I found out the work that she was doing in Stirling, and has subsequently become the Deputy Principal Research Director for the UKRI Healthy Aging Challenge. So I'm not 100% sure which hat you're wearing today. I do know that you were on a webathon wearing your UKRI hat earlier. So are you wearing two or what? Over to you, Judith.
I'm actually wearing my Stirling hat, actually, because what I'm going to talk about in the next 8 to 10 minutes is 30 years of research-led innovation being translated into practice with impact on the lives of older people living with dementia, which is the 30-year journey of our dementia centre at Stirling. So I'm wearing that particular hat. What I hope to do actually in the 10 minutes is to highlight the crucial role played by research in the design and adoption of standards. As I said, this is the story of the Dementia Services Development Centre at the University of Stirling, and it's been very much an ecosystem of working together for mutual benefit between researchers, between practitioners and people living with dementia, and carers at the heart of what we do. And it's an example of design research being translated into new products and services. The culmination of this work, if I can go to the next slide. Oh, whoops. What am I doing here? If we can go to the next slide, that's great. Thank you. Whoops. I just need to go back. That's it. Thank you. So in 2020, the culmination of this work is informing the development of an intergenerational living innovation hub. And the innovation hub will incorporate a development zone and innovation lab that will support a community of open innovation. This is combined with a demonstrator community of model homes and retail units to provide experimental and novel construction, environmental and digital innovation in a full-scale, dementia and age-friendly design built environment and outdoor space. It's located next to the Scottish International Environment Centre, which will be funded by a city and regional deal. And so we're badging this initiative as age and eco-sustainable. So we're not just looking at age-sustainable solutions, but also eco-solutions as well as we go forward. And this innovation hub is based in a deprived area in a local authority, very near the university, and will provide us with the opportunity of working directly with the community and looking at retrofitting as well as new solutions. We'll be enabling business to embrace the opportunity of an ageing population and through real life experimental scale research and to test products and also skills development. And I'll pause there because actually in the development of the hub, we're embracing principles which we see underpinning any standard or framework to support neighbourhoods for older people and for intergenerational neighbourhoods rather. Things that have been mentioned this afternoon: inclusive design based on evidence and knowledge, including lived experience. The lived experience is really important, and accommodating a life course perspective, recognising the diversity and different environmental conditions and contexts of ageing, as well as the difference and diversity amongst older people. Thirdly, open innovation, and also establishing a shared understanding of what success will actually look like with the local community, developed through a process of multi-stakeholder engagement, collective dialogue and co-creation, which is absolutely essential for these initiatives to go forward. And we believe it's about ageing in the right place, not ageing in place, and about challenging the policy rhetoric of independent living in favour of living interdependently. None of us actually live independently. I think it's important to recognise this. So we hope these are the kinds of principles that will be taken forward. I would just like to, in terms of moving on to the next slide, talk about some of the things that we've been doing. So the Iris Murdoch building was established in 2002, which was to look at services for older people living with dementia. Many people were prevented from being active citizens because public buildings were disorientating. And this was purpose-built with the intention that it would inspire other building going up and other designers to look at dementia principles. And the brief for it was for the building was intrinsically linked to the business model, and design articulated not only ways of working but research, and basing everything on the research underpinning that particular work. And the Catalyst building today represents the knowledge exchange as we understand it today, so a two-way flow of knowledge and co-creation. In 2008, the Dementia Design Audit Tool was launched, which established a benchmark for the quality of care home design for people with dementia. And I realised that we're talking about neighbourhoods, but care homes are very much part of neighbourhoods. And I think it's important to learn the lessons here, because we can transfer some of these tools from a care home environment to a larger environmental context. So other environments can also benefit from what we've learned about care home design. And the design audit tool was actually based on three sources of information: substantial international consensus, at the time of the publication, a modest amount of research on specific features compiled within a literature review, and expertise of people in the field. We also, at that time, established a consultancy service with accreditation as well. And this was looking at bespoke dementia design consultancy on new build and remodelling capital build projects, working in sports centres, hospitals, private dwellings, parks, gardens, and looking at graphics, signage, and other things in the public realm. And to date, we have about 350 plus live projects under this consultancy, and have done quite a lot of work in Japan. And the next slide, 2 slides, actually shows you some of the work that we have been doing. Actually, this last one is in Glasgow. In 2016, Iridis was conceived, and this has won lots of awards. The app is a digital version of the dementia design audit tool, meaning that expert guidance on design dementia is now available at the touch of a button and enables families, individuals, people with dementia, and health professionals and others to undertake research and evidence-based assessment of their environment. And it provides recommendations on design improvement to support people living with dementia. And the app represents a revolution, we believe, in the implementation of design principles in homes, workplaces, care facilities, and public buildings. So going on to the next slide, we also in 2017 have launched a project accreditation system. And this again will look at all products globally to see whether they are dementia proofed. And so these are all the kinds of things that we've been leading up to our innovation hub as the next development. We have a number of things underway. We are reviewing our audit tool at the moment and identifying continued benefits of the principles I outlined at the start. So our conclusion then from what we have learned already, and I think these are the kinds of things we should be taking into the next phase, is that we need to be evidence-based. And we believe that the standards should reinforce the importance of well-developed evidence base, drawing on principles outlined earlier. So an open innovation model based on lived experience, based on establishing a shared understanding of what success looks like with the local community. We must have user views and community at the heart of all of this, and the heart of driving our research and co-producing our research that can lead into these standards, and build on what's been adopted in one area and transferring that to other areas and other environments. And we must not reinvent the wheel. So I think there should be emphasis on fast-tracking knowledge and research so that we can actually have standards that are up to date and based on good, solid, quality evidence. And finally, I would just like to switch hats and talk about my UKRI role and say and tell the community that we're actually launching, or we have just launched, our Healthy Ageing Social Behaviour and Design Research Programme, which I hope people listening to the webinar will actually have a look at. It was launched last week, but we've had a webinar today on that programme. So inviting researchers into that programme to have a look at it and contribute to impact. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Judith. I know that Martin Hyde, who is not quite yet, has been looking at that, but we are going to turn to Sara Hayward now. We do, as a reminder, have Q&As, so an opportunity to address the speakers. I would also like to remind you that we have sent out, you, the audience, that we sent out the questionnaire, and please do respond to it. If you do respond to it, you will actually receive further information, potentially a summary of what you've heard today. If you don't, slap wrists. We now turn to a force of nature. Sara Hayward has attended pretty much all of our events, but at that point she was wrestling Med City into existence, and I've recently found out that she's now decamped to sunny Oxford, and you're going to tell us why.
Ian, thank you very much. I have to say that I feel a little bit of an interloper in this particular session because I'm sitting amongst some very highly esteemed academics, and I am not one of those people. But what I have been doing for the last 6 or 7 years is working at the interface between the academic community, the NHS community, health community, and industry to support innovation and collaboration, and particularly to support collaboration amongst groups that don't necessarily find it that easy to work together because of the siloed way that many organisations work. As Ian said, I've been involved in the Agile Ageing Alliance for several years now, and my interest really started from a desire to see a drive of digital technologies into the health setting and into the care setting, and to really think about how digital technology could be a disruptor and support greater independence, greater ability for people to remain in their own homes, and for them to take a greater degree of agency in how they manage their ageing process and their health processes. We then started to think as well about how healthcare is delivered and how neighbourhoods of the future might create opportunities for different parts of the healthcare system to play a more active role in the way that neighbourhoods develop and how those can be designed to support the older community. And one of the things that we were really interested in was how the pharmacy of the future could act as a hub for healthy ageing and to really be embedded in communities as they are already, but to support the ageing agenda. All of these things continue to be a challenge. And one of the things that I've been mulling over in preparation for this session today is what do we really mean by innovation? I had a really interesting challenge from a colleague that I've known for a few years now, somebody called Jim Dalton, who has an organisation called Impeller Ventures, and he is a real challenger to the idea of innovation being about a push of new ideas, but really about the issue of solving problems, and that there should be a pull for solutions from the problem and is around the role make any progress. So one of the key challenges, I think, for the university sector in terms of bringing its evidence, its research into evidence, its research into new products and services, is how we can create markets for that activity and how we can ensure that evidence is turned into impact and really makes change. We've seen some fantastic examples today, but unless it actually reaches the end user, how useful is that research? So I am just going to finish by reinforcing the fact that the standards that we're discussing today provide a really interesting opportunity to ensure that evidence is translated through into impact, that it is translated through into making a difference for end users. And I think that one of the things that I would call for is that we really think about the market-making opportunities that standards can play, and that we think about how that can support the translation of research from the academic base into impact for our healthy ageing society. Ian, thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure. Sarah, actually, I'm going to ask you a question, because could you have imagined having this conversation over this many hours the first year we did this? Because it was all a bit disparate, actually, if you recall. We had the NHS on one side of the room, we had you and the Digital Health Brigade on the other, and it was even trying to introduce you because it was the first event where the two sides had come together. So what we have today is a progression of that journey to get to a point where here you are, I've given you a platform to talk about the import of market, and you don't even have to sell it so hard. What do you say to that?
Well, I completely agree with you, Ian, and I think one of the things that's really interesting is how the world of the built environment has come so much closer to the world that I was representing, which was about the healthcare system, was about life sciences research and digital technology. And I think we've heard lots of examples today of where the environment, the built environment, research about that is interfacing and talking to the evidence around what good health looks like, what good care looks like, what good product design looks like, etc. And it feels to me as if these worlds are colliding, whereas I remember the first time that I spoke at one of your events, I used the term silos before. It felt like all of these things were operating in different pockets, and so it's great that things are coming together, and we need more ones.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah. Hang around because we are nearly there, folks. Martin Hyde is next up. A recent member of the Alliance. We came in contact through BSI. Actually, Nell recruited us both around the same time, and we considered ourselves to be kind of unusual suspects. And once we got our heads together, sparks were flying, and I am very pleased to introduce Martin. I wasn't aware of the fantastic work that's going on in Swansea. Martin will tell us something about it. He is the Associate Professor of Gerontology at the Centre for Innovative Ageing at Swansea University. and we had to have a man with a beard and tattoos. I've actually got the photographs because he sent them to me, but that's a story for another day. Onwards, Martin.
Thank you very much for the introduction and for the opportunity to be a part of this amazing event. Like you said, we came into contact through our involvement on the British Standards Institute and then the ISO. And I think this is a wonderful testament to the amount of support there is for understanding the potential impact of multi-generational neighbourhoods for ageing well and healthy ageing, and really a rather rare opportunity to bring so many stakeholders from so many different parts of society together, from business to academia, third sector, policymakers. Really quite incredible to share so many different stories around this. What I'd like to do today then is really sort of address the three questions that you set for us, Ian, and talk a little bit about what's going on here at Swansea and in Wales more generally, and hopefully what we can do to support this incredible initiative. So I'd like to take the second of your questions first, rather, because I feel that even the sort of the benefit of today, which is all these speakers, also potentially highlights one of the challenges that we face, not just in this particular area, but in research more generally, which is that we often don't capture the knowledge that's generated across so many different projects to really build the evidence base in a robust way. So we were asked what we would like to see as a byproduct of this ISO collaborative process, and I have 5 points that I would like to raise in that regard. Firstly, it is greater knowledge sharing. I think one of the challenges is that we often lose lots of knowledge through our inability, or sometimes even our unwillingness, to share our results, or that simply we're talking to different audiences and we're not really aware of what's going on elsewhere within our sector or between different countries. So I hope that this provides a forum in order for us to continue to share knowledge, examples of what's worked, evidence from various projects. The second thing I'd like to raise is echoing really what Judith and Sarah have just said, which is the need for more robust and rigorous testing in order to provide that really important evidence base for us to go forward. I think one of the key challenges that I'm aware of in a lot of the work we do is that there are so many local initiatives that get funded, or even big lottery projects that get funded, that don't always have good data collection or evaluation built into them. And I feel that so much important information potentially gets lost. So again, hopefully one of the things we bring a large international network as well. So again, some of the links that I hope can be shared. I am on the steering committee of a project called Equimob, which looks at inequalities in mobility in cities in India and Bangladesh. I'm also on the advisory committee or have connections to a number of international longitudinal studies in Iran, New Zealand and India. We also have a number of projects here looking at, there's a project called Sunrise, which is looking at the co-production of solar powered living for in communities in India. And one of our colleagues runs the Global Social Initiative on Aging, which is part of the International Association of Geriatrics and Gerontology, which connects with communities of scholars who are looking at aging research around the world. So I think we have a lot that we can kind of bring. And as Ian has intimated, at the moment, we're sort of looking for funding to look at how we can begin to pull together this evidence base to support the ISO framework standard submission, and try to sort of really, like I said, sort of fill those gaps, looking at what evidence is out there, beginning to develop the consensus around what the key issues are, and beginning to think about what research needs to be done in order to provide the evidence base to support this absolutely fantastic application. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was very thorough, Martin, and indicative of what is going on in Swansea. I'm very much looking forward to engaging further as we move ahead. I want to move straight on to Andrew Adkins, who's the director at the Bartlett Real Estate Institute at UCL. We've been talking for quite a time now about insights in this space. Again, I've talked about people who are truly inspirational, incredibly knowledgeable, and very generous with their time. Andrew fits that bill perfectly. I want to take another look at his beard. No, I'm not obsessed by beards, but I was surprised that lockdown has given him the time to create that one. So, Andrew, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian, and congratulations, everybody. I mean, the presenters, the technical team behind the scenes, Ian for a masterclass in emceeing. I'm aware that normally I would be the person that stands between you and the after-event drinks and canapes, but I guess we'll have to all provide our own. But I hope that we will be celebrating individually and at social distance from each other after today, because it's been a Herculean event in getting this ready. Anyway, I'm going to be speaking very briefly. I won't take up my full allotted time because large parts of what I've already said, what I want to say have already been said by the esteemed presenters who have gone before me. I think that what I will round on is what I would suggest any ISO framework should consider including in kind of sectional headings. I've had familiarity both with the ISO 9001 and then 14001, so quality and environmental management. So I know how powerful they can be. And I realised that, you know, as was said earlier by a number of other people, there's got to be appetite for this. If we just throw an ISO standard at the world and the world doesn't really want it, doesn't know what to do with it, and doesn't really care about it, then it will just sit on shelves gathering dust. Whereas if it's actually embraced, utilised, and cherished by the many that I think that it could affect, then I know that we will have done a good job in all of the formulation and drafting of it that will necessarily have to happen after something like today. Okay, so to give you some context, UCL, which I work for, is a massive organisation, and we've heard previously about silos. We are unbelievably siloed. We don't talk to each other anywhere near enough, and that's within the institution. So one of the things that we've done, and for those of you who aren't aware, that the Olympic site of the London 2012 Games is currently being regenerated. The Real Estate Institute, which I'm soon to not be the director of, it's a term-bound appointment, and it finishes quite soon, but I've been the person setting the thing up, and it's actually in what was the International Communications Centre for the 2012 Games. And I bring that up simply because we're a real institute. We designed it along the lines that you've heard many of the colleagues in the last in this last session talk about, which is collaboration and cross-fertilisation. So this idea about mutual development and the co-creation and co-development of things. I mean, it's a big area. We're tackling it as a big area because it's basically a huge problem that we've all had. We've all been burrowing away in our own little areas, and the world currently faces problems that need us all to get together, bring in our individual expertise. So we've got a real space. People, if you're interested, once lockdown is over and we return to some degree of normality, if I paint a picture of a facility that's within a massive ground scraper, which was the building that the Olympic Games broadcasts were generated from. So we've got a facility that basically enables people to talk. And it sits on top of some really sophisticated research projects and equipment, including robotics and AI and machine learning and all of that good stuff. So we're sort of sitting there, and we're basically a portal into the near future. You can see the sort of technologies that will be coming down the pike. And, you know, you can literally go and sort of touch them if you wanted to, 3D printers and all that sort of good stuff. So we're sort of sitting there, and we're basically a portal into the near future. You can see the sort of technologies that will be coming down the pike. And, you know, you can literally go and sort of touch them if you wanted to, 3D printers and all that sort of good stuff. So we're sort of sitting there, and we're basically a portal into the near future. You can see the sort of technologies that will be coming down the pike. And, you know, you can literally go and sort of touch them if you wanted to, 3D printers and all that sort of good stuff. So we set the thing up, and the Bartlett Real Estate Institute is what it's called, really because we were challenging the orthodoxy of what real estate was understood to be. So this is much more generic than just the issues associated with multi-generational living. It embraces a whole load of different areas. The specific route that I ended up meeting Ian and getting involved with the Agile Aging Alliance was through the healthcare facilities, which we've heard a lot about this afternoon, about how you move from sort of pathogenic to salutogenic design, so embracing well-being and avoidance rather than treating the problems that we all may have in our future lives. So to set the scene and give you a bigger context, and then I'll drill rapidly down, I promise. Three big things that real estate has been impacted by in the 21st century. First is the growing awareness of climate change, the creation and operation of our real estate and the built environment that it sits within is a massive generator of greenhouse gases and resource depletion. And so we've started to realise that the creation of our built environment has consequential costs to our natural environment, and we've got to deal with that. That has an impact on what we're talking about with multi-generational neighbourhoods, because we've got to deal with an ageing population as well as deal with the situation of climate change. Second big thing that led to what we're doing now was really the 2012 Games itself, set out deliberately to challenge the prejudice, bias, ignorance associated with a lot of disability, wanted to celebrate disability, first Paralympic Games to fully sell out all of its events, and really has indicated now that we can accept disability as just one of those things. You know, I'm bald, big deal, so what? I've got a beard, big deal, so what? Move on. And people now have, as we saw some earlier slides, buses now come complete with ramps. It's wonderful to watch people just getting on their own. The technology enables them to self-power their wheelchairs, get onto buses. They don't need any help. They don't want any help. Why should they have any help? I don't, so why should they? It's that kind of spirit. The third one was deeply impactful. It's not just because I'm a Londoner and I'm in UCL, but the Grenfell Tower, I think, really epitomises how we've got our value systems up the spout, to be perfectly honest with you. We've done the wrong type of real estate for the wrong type of reasons with the wrong type of consequences, including the catastrophic loss of life that Grenfell was. Okay, so that's the context. That's why I think that there's an argument that says that values need to be rethought, and so do others. I mean, I've not done this by myself by any means. UCL, as one of the universities, is a custodian of boundary pushing knowledge. We've heard that previously, evidence based. I think the COVID crisis has really brought to the fore the value of independent science. I think that the evidence that we've got, and scientists are very nervous about giving categoric answers. We caveat everything. We think this might be the way it is. We don't absolutely know. Let's do some more testing. Let's carry on some more research. But I think that level of trust, something that we've heard previously, is an important element for us as researchers in the universities that we set. But we typically drill deeply into very narrow areas. And so, as you've heard from the last set of speakers just before me, what we've really got to do is not drill any more deeply into any of these narrow areas, but rather cross-fertilise and cross-connect. So, all very well and good. What do I think about the standards, since this is my last 30 seconds worth? Here we go. I think that for a standard, my experience of them is that they offer a loose framework. So they shouldn't be prescriptive, because one size will not fit all. But to finish off, I think that the things that I've heard today, and I've been writing my notes during the day.
Andrew, I'm going to interrupt a minute because I'm getting playback of the recording. Is anybody else? I'm going to playback. My comment, please.
I'm certainly not getting anything.
Okay. What about other people?
Seems fine.
No. Okay. Fine. Mine. Sorry.
That's all right. Don't worry. I've been interrupted before, and it'll happen again, so don't worry at all. So, right, here we go. as it happens, it turns out that there are 5 fingers on my hand, and there are 5 items that I think that the framework should deal with. First of all, I think that it should absolutely have a section on it about definitions. I think it should question things like investment asset classes or zoning or planning use guides. It should definitely include something on what we mean definition of terms, so that we're all on the same page. I think there should be a section associated with regulations and standards itself. I know that the ISO is a standard, but I think that the point that's been made much earlier today and throughout today has been the fact that there's a plethora of existing standards. So the ISO needs to be one that knits together existing standards rather than just stands as an extra one that everybody else has to factor in. So I think that's an issue. One thing that I've heard in the background, I haven't heard it foregrounded too much today, but I think that the argument about business models and business practices. So the fact that house builders in the UK, and I'm sure everywhere else, will just design the easiest housing schemes they can and sell them to a public who seems to want to buy them without any real problem. And we end up with these kind of monocultural developments that are soulless and lacking in any of the things that we've seen with some of the wonderful examples we've had today. So I think that the business models and business practices need to be questioned, and that dovetails in very nicely with my 4th of 5 points, which is timescales. I think that we are seeing a shift from capital accumulation, so build it, flog it, flip it, however you want to do it, to now we're seeing more about long-term income generation, more long-term wealth and prosperity generation through ingrained activity created by the community that we want to build and grow. And then my last one, and this is the last point I'm going to make before handing back to Ian, is I think that the approach taken in the standard has to be something, and again, I'm just stealing the wise words of others, but I think the argument of inclusivity, I think participatory, so I think real estate should be with people, by people and for people, not thrown at them. With them being the last to know what's going on. And I think that needs to be an approach that's inclusive of people and the planet. I don't think that we should ignore planetary concerns as we go to fix the ageing population challenges for multi-generational living for the future. That's me done. Ian, thank you, and back to you.
Absolutely brilliant, thank you. Managed to switch it off. I was actually hearing myself at 9 o'clock this morning, which was totally confusing, and I was concerned everyone else was. Andrew, that was as comprehensive as I would have expected, albeit within a very limited time zone. So thank you for summarising effectively where we're at. I have a very compelling, I think, question that Nell has selected as the kind of Q&A finale, if you will, which, Nell, if you could read that out, and then I invite any of you who have spoken, first of all in the final session, but B, prior to that, to respond. We'd like some quick, snappy response. So over to you, Nell, please.
Yeah. So the question is, if you could tackle one element in the suggested standard, which one would you select as the most important? And then attached to that, is there any sectors or brands that you would wish that university would help to progress their research projects into the real world? So as a combined question.
Yeah, but you don't have to answer both parts if you don't want to. You can answer one is fire enough if it keeps things going. So who... put your hands up as you're ready to answer. 30 seconds, 15 seconds, snappy response from as many people as possible. Off you go, please. Okay, Martin.
I think for me, the thing that I'd really like to see addressed is issues around inequalities, and I think that speaks to the government's policy around reducing the gap. And unfortunately, we've seen recent evidence from the Marmot report that gap is widening. So I think this could play a real role in tackling those inequalities. I don't really have a product that we could sort of take to market at the moment, but I really am keen that businesses engage with academia and policymakers and practice and vice versa, as Andrew said at the end, to really kind of develop these standards collectively.
Yeah, I would rather stick with the first part of the question anyway, which I think is the crucial one. So, David, you had your hand up.
Okay, great. I didn't realize that, but okay. Yeah, so for me, the inclusivity and participation would be a huge part of the standard. So that's what I would like to choose. But I would also kind of like to just highlight the one that the last speaker, Andrew, made, which I thought was very interesting and essential. And I've heard it through the day in a couple of places about the importance of thinking about business models and practices. And this is something that I think kind of really has led to a lot of companies dropping out of the kind of movements, the race, so to say, over time, the difficulties in kind of engaging with procurement systems, about the notions about bringing in new products and services, and the notion of the new is very problematic in that way. I think there's a lot of, we often talk about legacy technology systems, but actually I think also a lot of the payment systems are also legacy, and we need to think about new ways and kind of be constantly kind of reflecting upon how we can improve these, make them more seamless and responsive.
So I saw Judith smiling. I suspect you were seeing it from two perspectives with different hats on, and she had a hand up. So Judith?
Well, I actually was going to answer the second part of the question, actually.
You can do it backwards.
Okay, I'll just quickly answer that, because I think universities and researchers are much better at thinking about impact and real life impact now than they ever have been, because we're actually assessed on it endlessly through the REF process, Research Excellence Framework. So I think, I think that it's quite an interesting question to reflect on, and I think it comes down to building up those relationships with different sectors and being able to influence those sectors rather than any one particular sector. So thinking about the kind of neighbourhood aspect, then certainly builders, but how do you actually make sure that your research has that impact? It really comes back to building up that longer term relationship, getting to know them. And I know certainly the work in Wales, one of the ways in which we've been able to, I used to be in Swansea, but one of the ways in which some of the initiatives are developing there are because of the great work that some of the researchers have been doing in building up those relationships over many years. So I think it's not something that can be done overnight.
Thank you. I've just seen that Bill Thomas has just joined the meeting. We'll give him a chance to say a few words in a moment, but I'd like to get the answers to the question, and that is, Andrew, you had your hand up.
Yep. If I had to, I'm going to go with the first bit, I think, and that would, well, actually, I guess it tackles a bit of both, but the two areas that I'd really like to see dovetail together are the way that investment asset classes are defined. So people invest in things like offices and invest in things like care homes, and then our planning regulations kind of give use classes to that sort of thing, which just encourages differentiation. I'd really like to I'd like to tackle the investment community and the planning community so that they really do embrace the idea of creating exciting and vibrant communities and neighbourhoods.
Fantastic. Bill, I'm going to have to ask you if you could do a 3-minute resume of your presentation, I'm afraid, because we're running out of time, and I gave such a wonderful build-up to you. I talked about the fact that you wear sandals without socks in December, and I really talked about the need for love. And there I went, Bill, and he wasn't there. So talk about love, please.
I would be happy to. And first off, grateful to be with this group and to see this work being carried forward. Let me just say that if we trace back the core issues related to alienation, to the degradation of community, to the separation of people of different backgrounds and abilities into component groups, what we really are seeing is a failure of love to be represented in our standards, in our work, in our mechanisms for bringing about change. So in some ways, it seems a bit odd and off-putting to say that love has a role to play here, but in fact, it does. And it has a role of unifying our purpose. And I want to connect that to a comment that was just made about asset classes. You know, we live in a world that's defined in terms of the asset classes that large investors are willing to invest in. And I think one really important part of the ISO standards and the work we're trying to do together is actually laying the foundation for an asset class, a new asset class, and one that's really founded based on reciprocity, relationship, community, belonging, and that these things are necessary if we're going to build a future. So the ISO work and the standards is a way of taking what might seem like a bit of a soft-headed approach that really is just like, oh, all you need is love, just like that band said. Instead, I think we really need to acknowledge that we need the shelter of each other, and that it's in the shelter of each other that we will find our path forward.
That was 3 minutes. My goodness, that was fantastic. Thank you. You caught me completely by surprise. So, did anyone else want to answer the question? I give one last shot to any hand that did not go up previously. Alexander, did you answer before? I'm sorry, I'm going cross-eyed.